Pod. Welcome back to another episode of Say Who, Say Pod. He's Danny O'Neil in a sports coat. I'm Christian Caple. The Washington Huskies are still 2-0. They did not defeat Bye. They were not defeated by Bye last week. And Jonah Coleman, as I predicted, did not extend his streak of Big Ten honors.
Schedule got in the way. The schedule was the only thing that could stop Jonah Coleman.
You knew it was going to toughen up at some point, and not having an opponent to play severely diminished his rushing touchdown total. We're going to talk Apple Cup, going to preview the Apple Cup, going to chat with Greg Woods, who covers Washington State for the Spokesman-Review. Before we do all of that, I, of course, must let you know that today's episode of Say Who, Say Pod is brought to you by our good friends at Chuck Olson Kia. Locally owned and operated since 1964, family owned and operated by a family of University of Washington graduates with a friendly, low-pressure sales staff and a competitively priced selection of vehicles. We hope you'll make Chuck Olson Kia your next destination for any vehicle buying needs. If you do, say hello to our good friend Henry Olson, and if you chat with Henry Olson, let him know that Say Who, Say Pod sent you. Rough go in Denton, Texas for Washington State last week. I find myself feeling like a bit of an old codger when I see terms like rock bottom being thrown out about a Washington State program that, for as bad as a 59-10 loss to North Texas is, still has a 2-1 record, is not going to go 1-11 this year, is not going to threaten going winless or anything like that. I remember the Paul Wolf era. Maybe some people don't. I saw it invoked a time or two because that result did feel a little bit Wolfian. But I don't know. Are we so certain that that's what it's going to be like, and that Washington State can't just bounce back from what might have just been a bad performance?
So my short answer to that is this is rock bottom, because previously there was always the life preserver that was playing in the Pac-10, Pac-12. I think the fact that they're in the Tupac now with a new conference coming on, and the question of where they are going to rank in the new pecking order, because before they were still, regardless of what happened, they were a Pac-10, Pac-12 team. And that's probably what felt most alarming in looking at that, because I'm going to admit, usually I'd snicker. And I didn't see the score. Like, the first score I saw was 42-3, and then I saw it was halftime. And usually I would have some sort of smug, condescending reaction to it. I did not in this case. I was really like, whoa. Maybe it is just 5 turnovers. Games can happen that way, but watching it, and I did go back and watch it, their defense just looked really, really slow. And the offense obviously has huge problems with the turnovers. But even if you took the offensive performance out of it, their defense just didn't look capable of stopping North Texas at any point.
Let's get into it with somebody who was there and who has been covering this team the last couple years, and all of the machinations and conference realignment and roster reconstruction and this last offseason a coaching change. Let's get to our conversation with Greg Woods from the Spokesman-Review. All right. Well, as we said, we're happy to be joined today by Greg Woods, who covers Washington State for the Spokesman-Review, a job I had many years ago now. Thanks for joining us, Greg. I guess I wanted to start by getting a little bit of a state of the program on WSU from you. I feel like if you told Wazoo fans that 3 games into the Jimmy Rogers era, they'd be 2-1, that wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing. You'd like to think you could go 3-0 against that schedule, but a game at North Texas, that's not the easiest trip. But it sure feels like the nature of that loss last week has soured the vibe considerably.
For sure. I mean, I was just telling you before we hit record, just like how fast it got out of hand. I mean, the way I've written about that game is only like in terms of the first half, because the second half was just like a wash because it was just like not really that competitive because of the score. So yeah, that kind of loss just in terms of the magnitude, or how lopsided it was, is definitely kind of brought down the vibe around the program. But when you have the Apple Cup coming up, it's not that hard to kind of pick things back up in terms of the vibe and the mood. So yeah, I don't think any of them, saw something like that coming. Definitely got, some of the vibes down. I mean, honestly, some of the bigger reasons were because, I mean, they're having to start like a walk-on linebacker right now, and a couple guys out with injuries. So, and obviously, I mean, the QB situation is gotten a lot more headlines, and that's, to me, that's like kind of the bigger news right now. But yeah, definitely not the most smooth start to going into the Apple Cup, um, but 2 games before that, they looked a little better too. So.
Greg, what did you take away? How did Jimmy Rogers feel about the game in Denton? I mean, obviously he's hugely disappointed. Did it feel like the result stunned him?
I think it surprised him for sure, just because of like how much they lost by. Like, I think probably internally he probably understood that, like, that's not a very easy environment to walk into. I mean, it was like 90 degrees on the field. It's first road start for his first year starting quarterback. Obviously there's all the different South Dakota State guys that he brought along who are in that kind of environment for the first time. So I think, like, if he had some like truth serum, he would probably say that he wasn't that surprised just to lose in any fashion. But I think the way they lost, and just like how quickly and it got out of hand, and just like some of the problems that they experienced in that loss, I think were not problems that they were expecting to have coming into the season. Like, they can't run the ball, I think, is the underlying problem that sets the stage for the other problems that they're experiencing. And I never was that more obvious than in this loss to North Texas. I mean, their starting running back has five uh, 5 carries for 8 yards, or something like that, and their number two has 33 yards. So I just think all these problems that they're having right now are not ones that they were expecting to have, and that is kind of what kind of throws them off tilt a little bit.
You mentioned the quarterback situation. We all watched Zevi Eckhouse throw for 360 yards and a few touchdowns and a couple picks too, but you
Yeah.
played more than admirably in the Holiday Bowl against Syracuse last year. And I think did the thing everybody does during a coaching search, right? Go coaching transition. He went in the portal and they convinced him to stay. And that at the time felt like a huge win for Jimmy Rogers. I think everybody was kind of projecting him to be the starter. And then week one against Idaho, it's Jackson Potter. And they play Julian Duggar a little bit. And Eckhouse is the one guy we don't see. And he gets out there in the fourth quarter and didn't play perfectly, but did lead them on their lone touchdown drive, I believe. And
Yeah.
now Jimmy Rogers says it's an open competition this week. What is going on with the quarterback situation? What was it about Zevi Eckhouse that I guess wasn't enough for them, or that they didn't see through training camp maybe to go with Jackson Potter? And how do you expect things to play out this week? How much of a read do we have on that as far as who the starter is going to be?
Yeah. Well, the way they are presenting it is, like you said, it's an open competition between Jackson Potter, Julian Duggar, and Zevi Eckhouse. So if we believe that, if we take them at their word that all three of those guys have, somewhat of an equal chance to earn the starting job on Saturday, um, the way I see it though is that, like, these coaches are like super protective of every competitive advantage that they can possibly find. I mean, that's why they didn't announce a starter at all before the first game of the season. I mean, we didn't know until a lot. Well, I didn't know because I was at the game in person, but apparently they ran like a pregame interview right before kickoff, and that's when Jimmy Rogers announced it was going to be Jackson Potter. But before then, like, we had no idea who it was going to be. So the point I'm trying to make is that, like, because of what we know about the way they are protective of what the opponent knows about who's going to play at quarterback, that makes me a little bit like think a little bit twice about what's going on during this week of practice. Because, I mean, I'm not trying to like say they're lying. I mean, it's entirely possible that they're making this an equal shot kind of thing. But because of what we know about the way they protect these advantages, the way I see it is this. Let's say you're Jimmy Rogers or, Danny Freund, their OC, and you want to make a change of quarterback. You have a few options. Number one, you could just not say anything and surprise UW by trotting out someone else for the first snap on Saturday in the Apple Cup. That would take them by surprise, obviously, if you don't say anything. So that's option one. Option two is to come out on Monday and say we're having an open competition. And what that does is, at least theoretically, introduces another possible candidate that Washington has to prepare for in Julian Duggar. Now, I'm not, this is a little bit of like a tinfoil moment hat maybe for me, but I do think there is something to be said about just like if there's some sort of like gamesmanship going on Washington State's side, because that is kind of the way they play things at the end of the season. But in terms of like, who it might be, I would not be surprised if they went with Zevier Eckhouse just because of I think what they pri are learning is more important than maybe they expected. Like on Monday when we talked to Jimmy Rogers, he seemed pretty unhappy with some of like the decisions that Jackson Potter was making in terms of reads of the coverage. One of the three interceptions he threw was because of some pressure he was facing. His running back got blown up trying to pick up a blitz, and he ends up overthrowing his tight end over the middle. So, not a great throw, but you kind of see how a throw like that might get thrown off. But the other two, I think, were really kind of what rubbed coaches the wrong way because of just like the wrong reads of coverage that he was making. The third one in my mind stands out the most, where Rogers brought this up on Monday, was he was what they were hoping he would do was kind of bait the middle linebacker into covering more of the middle of the field, which would open up a receiver on the right side. Well, he doesn't do that, and it ends up being an interception because the linebacker had a pretty easy way of reading that throw. So I think because of that, because if that's bothering the coaches the way it seems like it is, I would not be surprised if it was Zevier on Saturdays because of the experience he has playing college football. I mean, he played 3 years at Bryant, which is an FCS school in Rhode Island. Obviously played the Holiday Bowl, like you said, last year, and ends up with 3 touchdowns and the 2 picks as well. But I think if they really are, wanting somebody who can make the kinds of reads that they want their quarterback to make, I think it'll be Xavier Eckhouse. On top of the fact that if they really can't figure out their issues with running the ball, then it becomes even more important for their quarterback to be able to make those kinds of reads because if the defense doesn't respect your ability to run the ball, well, now there's more defenders at coverage. Now you've got to make those kinds of reads that are easier for a quarterback of his experience to make, if that makes sense.
Got 3 games. In two of them, I would say the Cougs looked well against North Texas. It looked like they were outclassed. Idaho looked kind of like a pure program. But then in the game against San Diego State, I thought they played really well. And after the North Texas result, I found myself wondering, well, maybe San Diego State's terrible, but maybe this was just a bad performance on the road with a couple turnovers, 5 turnovers in the first half that made it look ugly. Which do you think is closer to who the Cougs will be this season? The game against San Diego State or the game against North Texas?
I think it has to be San Diego State. What's crazy about the North Texas game is that you look up and they gave up 59 points, and you're tempted to believe, oh my God, like what a terrible defense. Not really the case. They only gave up, I want to say like 470 yards of offense, and the Mean Green was starting drives, within the Wazoo 20 almost every time. So they didn't end up actually gashing them on offense the way you might be tempted to believe based off the final score. Um, and so I think just because of like the tough spots that the defense was put in because of the interceptions and the 5 turnovers in total, I think that like their defense is definitely a lot better than you might think based off of a game like that. I mean, San Diego State, I mean, I'm not trying to, disrespect North Texas offense. They're incredible and but with the Aztecs, I mean, they have, a great offensive line. Their quarterback played at Michigan the last 2 years, and so they have some talent. And I think when you give their defense a chance to actually defend outside of their own, the shadow of their own end zone, they looked great. It's just a matter of, where will they be on the field when they're taking over. So I think they'll definitely be looking a little bit closer to their game against San Diego State. But if turnovers happen again, it's like, well, now you got to play, backed up into your own end zone, and that's when things get a little tricky.
You may have just answered it right there, but I mean, if they do turn things around quickly, if they play much better against Washington than they did against North Texas, what's going to carry them?
Oh, it's got to be their defense. I mean, it's their offense is like a giant question mark right now. I mean, even if they make a change of quarterback, I mean, not being able to run the ball is um, creating all these problems. Like they kind of compound when you have like kind of a one-dimensional offense to some degree. So their defense is going to be what kind of carries the day. I mean, their safety core has been awesome. I mean, Tucker Large is probably their best defender. He's a transfer from South Dakota State, and you check out the other two safeties and Matt Durant and Kale Rader, who just came back from injury for the first time this season. They've all been great. I mean, they had their moments on Saturday, but I mean, for the most part, you expect those guys to be better when they're not backed up against their own end zone. So, um, I think their pass rush has to get a lot better though. I don't think they sacked Drew Messmaker, who's the North Texas quarterback, at all on Saturday. They were a lot better in that department against San Diego State, but I think if they do improve, if they look a lot better against Washington, like you said, it's going to be because of their defense and just how much, um, just like the fewer amount of question marks they have on that side of the ball and some of the experience they have, and it's borne out. I mean. Like you said, I mean, given that 59, you could have played a lot better on defense, obviously. But in terms of the actual yards they gave up and the positions they were put in, they could have been a lot worse, obviously, which sounds crazy to say out loud when you give up 59, but that was the case. And so, I think if they do improve, if they do look a lot better, on Saturday, it will be because of their defense for sure.
I thought over the past couple years, Jake Dickert did a great job of kind of keeping the morale of the program high and kind of emphasizing the love the players had for each other. I thought he did about as good a job as you can do given sort of the larger forces in college football and the reorganization. I don't know as much about Jimmy Rogers. My first impression was that he said or at long snapper and announced no starters. He seems fairly secretive. What's Jimmy Rogers like to deal with?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, not as like forthcoming with those kinds of things as Jake Dickert was. And I think if you don't know a whole lot about him and you just kind of to see the way he presents himself in the media, you're tempted to believe like, oh man, it's kind of grumpy guy, kind of gives off that kind of vibe, but not really the case at all once you get to know him. I think he he's not nearly as grumpy as he looks. He can get chatty a lot of times. I mean, like. I asked him on Monday about kind of the issues with the writing game that turns into like a several minute spiel with the state of the program. So yeah, I definitely protective of like injuries and more sensitive topics like that, as any coach would be. But definitely not the kind of grumpy, coach that he kind of, can make himself out to be sometimes. I mean, we've gotten him to crack a smile a few times, which is, a step in the right direction. And yeah, he's fine. I mean, even like on Monday, after the cameras turned off and we were heading out, he kind of just joked with us like, "Man, you guys ask kind of the same questions all the time." Da da da. And like, I don't know, he just kind of giving us a hard time. So different things like that, I think you don't see just on his interviews or on YouTube or whatever. So yeah, definitely not as like effervescent and as just kind of bubbly as Jake Diggert was. But I think if he wins games, fans will not care nearly as much.
Obviously, a lot of ramifications to go along with the conference realignment of the last couple years, and now I think maybe for the first time some hope going forward with the Pac-12 being built out and knowing what the league is going to look like and being able to have a league schedule again next year. I'm curious, like on the NIL and revenue share front, what you've heard from Ann McCoy, what you've heard from Washington State administrators about the way that they want to invest that way, because that's obviously among the bigger concerns, right, as far as recruiting players and if you're competing with Power Four programs for a certain prospect who are going to have the 15 million or close to it to spend on their football roster. I'm just wondering what the resources might look like for WSU on that front.
Yeah, well, the official number that we got from Ann McCoy earlier this year was 4.5 million toward football revenue sharing for the year, which is not actually as much as might seem like at first blush because part of that is going to like scholarships and like stipends and that kind of thing. So the actual like true NIL number is probably a little less than that. And obviously that's I mean 4.5 is already a fraction of the 20.5 that's allowed. So you're looking at even a smaller fraction of that once you get down to the true NIL number. So yeah, definitely kind of a rough time for them in that regard. I think I think more than anything it's just like it's just kind of it reinforces the reality that things are really changing for them. I mean, in the traditional Pac-12, they had the recruiting advantage of being able to say, "Hey, do you want to play in the Pac-12 or do you want to play in the Mountain West?" Well, that's not really, the same advantage that it used to be, obviously. So you add that on top of, what limited NIL dollars they might be able to offer, and you might not get the kinds of recruits that you were getting in years past. So I mean, obviously, like the smaller the number, the worse it looks, obviously. But I think it's like just kind of, I think it does a pretty good job of capturing just kind of the state of where they are in terms of what kind of players they can get into the program. Um, and so I think that they're trying to like find different ways to I mean they still I mean their NIL collective, the Cougar Collective is still operating the way it has in years past. They're finding, different kinds of deals for guys through that, and I don't think much has changed on that front at all. So I think people are kind of waking up, or like Cougar alumni are kind of waking up to like the importance of that. I think there is still kind of a disconnect with alumni. Um, in terms of like where their dollars should be spent, because a lot of them just see the Cougar Athletic Fund, which goes to like scholarships and facilities and things like that, and think, that's where my money should go. And like they appreciate that. That's important in its own right, obviously. But what the collective is trying to wake people up to in terms of the alumni is like, hey, we are like just as important or maybe even more important in 2025 with where your dollar should go because of, it has a direct on-field impact of who we can get into the program and who we can convince to stay. So I think the more they can, uh, earn the alumni's trust and wake them up to where their dollars are best invested. That's kind of what they're trying to do. It's just tough when you only have a certain amount of institutional NIL to start with, and then you're trying to scrounge up as much money as you can from the alumni and things like that.
This game's sold out, and I believe beer and wine are going to be available at concessions for the first time, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yep.
I'm expecting a fun atmosphere, a
Yeah.
lively atmosphere, but I'm wondering what your sense is of Wazoo fans' appetite for continuing to play this game. I think opinions on both sides have varied wildly since the split in August of 2023. I don't think anybody liked the Lumen Field setup last year, though certainly WSU fans loved the outcome. Um, I like that it's back on campus, but with the future of college football scheduling, and is there going to be some Big Ten SEC challenge, and is there room for Washington to schedule any other home and homes with other schools? There's a lot of kind of questions that have not been answered yet about the future of this series. I'm wondering what your sense is of how badly Wazoo fans at least either want it to continue or don't want it to continue.
I think if you asked 100 WSU alumni if they want to continue the Apple Cup, you would get 50 yeses and 50 nos. I think there is like such a distinct split because half of them see the Huskies as these like, traitors who ended the Pac-12 and now they want to continue to play the game with us. Like, nah, man, like, screw off. So I think there's half of them feel that way. Half of them still feel energized that they want to beat them and show them what's up and kind of use that as a way to kind of get back at UW for what they see as like a slide against their school and just kind of the final nail in the coffin. So I think opinions are super duper split. I think after they win the game last year, you might get more yeses than no, just because they see it as like a feasible thing to win the game, which I think like is probably more true than they let on. I think that for as many of them might think that we don't want to play the game. We want nothing to do with them. Deep down, probably, some of them probably do want to play the game because they want to beat them. It's just, there's obviously there's a gulf in terms of the resources, in terms of the talent gap, in terms of all that kind of thing. And there already was obviously a little, to some extent in the regular Pac-12, but now obviously things have changed. To an even greater magnitude now in terms of the conference situation. So I think there is definitely appetite. I think, having it back in Pullman is a big deal. It's the first one in 3 years, obviously, which makes it a big difference. Um, I do think that if they get smoked on Saturday, then you might see some of the opinions start to sift against playing the game. But it is on contract for the next 2 or 3 years, I believe. So I think that there might be a little bit of like what's the word, like fickleness maybe in terms of just like the outcome of the game and how that swings public opinion. But I do think either way it's still split almost evenly. Um, and that's kind of, I guess that's kind of the way it goes with human nature and kind of who wins each game.
My wife and I are going to try to eat lunch in Pullman before the game, and I've got like birch and barley is always my go-to.
Yeah,
Um, I'm a little worried about crowds though at some of the popular spots. Haven't been to
yeah,
Cella's in a long time. Would love to go to Cella's, but like Cella's lunch before the 4:30 Apple Cup, I don't know. What's your recommendation for not just like a good lunch spot, but somewhere where maybe you're not fighting like a huge crowd to get a table or whatever?
yeah. Well, one of my favorite spots is the Land. That they have like these awesome chicken sandwiches that are just unbelievable. So the Land would definitely be my like top recommendations in terms of like places to drink. I mean, obviously the two college bars are going to be crazy with the Coug and Valhalla, but for grown people like you and I, maybe there's a place called Rico's, which is downtown. That's usually more of a chill vibe that might not be as crazy. My office is also right there, but that's kind of a mainstream as they go in Pullman spot. I'm trying to think. Rico's, oh God, man, you're making me seem like a hermit. I'm on the spot. Rico's, Valhalla, my office. Those are kind of the most of the spots I go to. In terms of food. Here's a more if any UW fans are not familiar with Pullman, here's one for you. Red Card. That is like more, it's like a taco. They're big on tacos. That's what I've got there a few times. It's like kind of a smaller, like physically smaller building. And I think not as many people know about it if you're not like you don't spend a lot of time there.
Oh,
So
interesting.
if you don't want a place that might be super crowded, that might be the way to go for sure.
I will only add on the bar front on I think on all football weekends, but on Apple Cup weekend especially. The Coug is for everybody. The Coug is
Yeah,
all like
yeah,
it
yeah.
is like, you're totally like it's the quintessential college bar, but I think especially on Apple Cup weekend it's like all ages are permitted. You'll see anybody
Everybody's
and
there.
everybody in there. I'm one of the
Yeah.
things I miss the most about the Apple Cup being played on Thanksgiving weekend is like especially when it's a Friday game, which it often was. That Thanksgiving evening gathering at the Coug where you'd run into anybody and everybody who was at the game. That was always a fun time. So, hey Greg, really appreciate this.
Yeah.
Keep up the great work. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you in the press box on Saturday.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks again to Greg for joining us this week. I will say, and I might write this at some point, I remember watching a Washington State team look completely lifeless in a blowout loss at Arizona State to fall to 2-9 and thinking we're 7 days away from wrapping up a 2-10 season and all of the questions that's going to generate around how year one under Mike Leach played out and where do they go from here. And a week later, Tony Pole was rumbling down the field at Martin Stadium with an interception of Keith Price. And then Andrew Fernie was celebrating a game-winning field goal. And they used the Apple Cup to launch into a much better, the offseason before, a much better year two. And they went to a bowl game and all those sort of things. So I have seen a Washington State team play as poorly as a team can play and then turn around and win an Apple Cup a week later. It doesn't feel like anyone's even entertaining that possibility this year. And I feel like maybe that's something that should be noted.
Do you think I'm overreacting to how it looked?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's tough. Like it's a bit of a catch-22, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of, well, when you commit 5 turnovers, that changes the picture for both sides of the ball instantly. That you don't really get to do what you want defensively because you're playing from an insane field position disadvantage, and you don't really do what you want to do offensively. This team wants to establish the run and run the ball, which is not something that they've been able to do well. They didn't do well against Idaho either in a game that they did manage to win. But the catch-22 of that is, well, if you're the kind of team that commits 5 turnovers, then yeah, life's going to be hard. So are they going to be that kind of team every week? They're having a quarterback competition like we talked about with Greg. I agree with him. It kind of seems like signs point to it being Zevi Eckhouse. If you're going to have a competition after 3 games and like the one guy who at least gave you a little bit of juice in this really bad loss and who, you know, the whole country saw played pretty well in a bowl game last year. I'd be surprised if he doesn't at least get like a big opportunity, whether he's the first guy out there or not. So, you know, maybe there are some levers that they can pull to turn this thing around in a week, and they'll be playing at home and they'll get some energy off the fact that it's the Apple Cup. But from Washington's perspective, I mean, analyzing this through a lens of Washington State against Washington, it feels like the difference in size and speed and talent has opened enormously from last year when John Mateer was starting for Washington State at quarterback, and they had a roster still mainly comprised of guys who signed up to play in a Power 5 conference.
Yeah, to me, and everything is gauged through that window for me looking at the Cougs, where I just see 2 games where they've looked like a team that is closer to an FCS program than a Power 5 program. And there's no secret about why that is. Their athletic director, their head coach, and Jake Dickert, their past 2 starting quarterbacks have all moved on, in addition to a number of other players, because of resources, right? Like there's no secret about why this is happening. And I guess I'm sad because I feel like the Apple Cup, when you asked Greg about the appetite for the Apple Cup, I really wonder about that. How much fun is this series going to be anymore if it continues, which obviously is not nearly a slam dunk when you consider the impact on scheduling it has, is that it has looked, both that Idaho and this North Texas game, it just looked like Washington State is not going to be a competitive program on Saturday.
Jimmy Rogers came from the FCS.
Mm-hmm.
He did bring with him many transfers from FCS. We've seen a number of FCS transfers come up to FBS and play at an FBS level, right? If you want to say that's, I won't say the beauty of the transfer portal, but that's one positive of the transfer portal for certain individuals who maybe get overlooked in recruiting or develop differently than FBS coaches thought they would, and that's why they didn't offer them. And that still sucks, like for those FCS programs who took a chance on Cooper Kupp, who played his whole career at Eastern Washington, and a guy like that would never do that now. You'd be moving up after a year or 2, and so that's a bummer. But that's kind of, one of the questions around Washington State this year was like, can they prove that these FCS transfers they're bringing from very good FCS programs, one very good FCS program in several cases, can they prove that they're not FCS players, so to speak, that they're guys who should be playing at the FBS level? And I think that the jury's still out on that. One result doesn't prove that. Certainly they were several touchdowns better than a future fellow conference member in San Diego State. So we'll see on that front. What I'm wondering, like from you as a Washington fan, is like Washington State won this game last year. I'm sure internally at Washington, they're talking about vengeance And they're talking about getting the Apple Cup back in Seattle and back in that empty trophy case in their meeting room and, restoring order or whatever. I'm wondering, in your opinion, is vengeance possible in a game like this when the rosters have changed so dramatically? There are so few people left at Washington State who were part of that game, and the circumstances surrounding the programs are frankly so unfair resource-wise, and Washington has such a huge advantage, more than it always has, and all these sort of things. Do you think that if this game ends with Washington on top and they're leaving Martin Stadium with the Apple Cup and all those sort of things, will you feel like order was restored, or will it just feel like a game that they should have won?
It will feel like a game they should have won. And if they don't win by more than 20, I'm going to have serious questions about whether they're going to finish with a winning record in the Big Ten. That's straightforward, honestly, what it feels like. And I realize that is bearing a huge weight. I'm putting way more emphasis on the North Texas result for Washington State than the San Diego State result. But that's just the reality of if you're going to be a serious program, if this regime, this coaching staff is going to work, if your quarterback is the kind of and caliber of player that it looks like he is, that you win this game going away. It seems like Washington State in some ways took the best case scenario for Washington State this year was that they are going to take the ingredients that were a winning combination for Jimmy Rogers at his previous stop and plant them at the new spot in the same way that Indiana's coach did last year. And right now it looks like there's a huge difference between taking players from James Madison and taking players from an FCS school. Like that's what it looks like to me. So I feel bad about this game. Because I don't want to, there's no way to not sound like a jerk to Cougar fans. And I feel like we're seeing the cost of the reorganization. And I don't want to be like an Oregon fan that is like, well, this is just how it works in today's college football. Like I think it sucks what is going on. And if I was a Coug fan, I'd probably be really furious at a great number of people in college football that this is the way it's gone down.
I'm torn between interpreting the North Texas result as the canary in the coal mine of just how long of a slog Washington State is going to face here. And also not overreacting to it in the same way that should we all assume that the way it went for Washington in the Big Ten last year is just the way it's going to be going forward? Or did they not already pretty apparently in one offseason take a pretty big jump forward? And we'll see how big when they play Ohio State and Michigan and Illinois and Oregon. But Washington State just lost its head coach too.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And hired a first-time FBS head coach who has been very successful at the FCS level. And when you have a new coach, you bring some portion of that head coach, if he is a sitting head coach, you bring some portion of that head coach's roster with you. It's what Jed Fish did at Washington. I'm sure it was part of the calculus for hiring him. Not a huge part, not the determining part, but some part that, beyond even the guys he brought, the possibility of maybe even Noah Fafita or Tedero and McMillan or some of the guys who did stay at Arizona. Washington is fortunate that roster included a great, potentially all-American type running back and a couple really good cornerbacks and some defensive players who can really help you. So I don't know. I think I want to give Jimmy Rogers more than 3 games before we just conclude definitively that 59-10 in Denton, Texas is who they are going forward, period. They're going to be in a conference next year with a conference schedule, with a conference championship to compete for. One of the teams they're going to compete against for that conference championship, they beat by 23 points at home 7 days before this terrible result in North Texas. So I'm not trying to excuse it or say, oh no, actually they'll be 10-2 and things are going to be great. This result means nothing. I just think of course, year one under Jimmy Rogers is not going to look awesome. They lost their head coach late in the cycle after they lost, John Mateer and all this. This was not an ideal offseason. So I understand like all of the concerns around retention and the portal and NIL, and you heard Greg talk a little bit about kind of the disadvantage they're at there with house related revenue sharing relative to Power 4 conferences. We'll see how that slots in the new Pac-12, but I don't know. Shouldn't this be their worst year? Shouldn't this be their worst year under Jimmy Rogers? Like if this result does go the way that like the Vegas point spreads suggest it's going to go, should it be one that we use to jump to the conclusion that this series isn't worth playing anymore? Or is this sort of just the worst it's going to get for Wazoo? And then maybe year 2 and year 3, if Jimmy Rogers is who they hope he is, gets gradually better the way that it looks like it is at Washington under Jed Fish in the Big Ten.
I think the question now is when water finds its level, what level is that? You're right. This should be the worst point, in much the same way that the first month of last season should be the worst point of Jed Fish's run at Washington. That given the offseason attrition and all the change, I just look at it in Washington's case. There were a lot of signs that you could point to that would say it's going to get better significantly quicker. You're going to get more revenue from the Big Ten. Like that is going to be something that buoys you. You have some advantages as it's one of the only schools of its caliber that points to a pretty thriving city that it lives in, an urban environment. There are attributes that the University of Washington has. And for the Cougs, what I look at it is, if I was a Cougs fan, how would I feel about, well, how bad is it going to get here? What are going to be our peer programs? And the best case answer in that scenario is Boise State, I would think, which is pretty good. And I think everybody would sign up for now in a heartbeat. And when you lose the way they lost in North Texas, my question becomes, well, are we sure that it won't be significantly lower than that it won't be a Colorado State, or it won't be a school that really doesn't have, because Washington State freaking gone to Rose Bowls in our recent memory. They've had top 5 picks. And watching that happen, I was like, well, there's no safety net here. I guess that's probably more than anything what I felt. But you're right. I could be overreacting, and I could be just focusing so much on the North Texas result, which awful lopsided scores are going to happen when you have 5 turnovers and a half. Like that's going to be the result of it. But man, that defense just looked small and slow in that game. That defense looked small and slow. So yeah, now watch me a week from now. I'll come in like, Washington's got to feel good. Winning a game, a rivalry game, you throw all the records out. But I guarantee if they win by 7 points, I'm going to be wondering, oh dear God, what is this season going to, what is going to be in store for Washington this season?
IP's fired up for the Apple Cup.
He is not. If I sound like the turd in the punch bowl, wait till you get a load of this guy right here, our weekly conversation with IP McFarland.
It's Apple Cup week. Yay. I hate this game. I try not to use the word hate, but I hate this game. And it's only gotten worse since the split in conference. It feels like that meeting your boss just schedules with you 2 days out, and you think everything is fine, but your boss doesn't schedule meetings with you, so about 2% of you thinks you're about to get fired for no apparent reason. You could not paint a worse scenario for Washington. WSU sputtered against Idaho, somehow showed all kinds of capabilities against San Diego State, who must be terrible, by the way, and then goes on the road and loses by 49 to North Texas, who isn't bad, but dog. And then Washington is coming off a 60-point win and then a bye. This isn't David versus Goliath. This is if David had walked in carrying like grenades and just swallowed one because he doesn't care if he dies, just as long as everybody else dies with him. I hate this game. I hate this game. My question this week, beyond which one of you can send me a handful of Xanax in the mail, how do you handle Damon Williams in this game? I think how you handle Vicario Davis is pretty clear. You keep him out, and it sounds like that's going to happen anyway. But you're up against the 119th ranked defense in S&P. They're going to lose. 119th ranked defense in S&P. Do you tell Damon Williams, stay in the pocket, do not run, don't get hit? You've got Ohio State and then the rest of the Big Ten coming, or do you just let him loose and then pull him as soon as you can? I just want it to be Sunday. Wish you guys a good week. Go Dogs.
Very anxious. Very anxious, IP.
Listen to him. He can barely contain himself.
You absolutely do not give Damon Williams any instructions about modifying the way he plays. Like, that's absolutely not. No,
they got to go out there. The game.
Yeah, you go out there and play the game. You play the game.
I think the challenge is to Jonah Coleman and the offensive line. Like I think, and again, like Jonah Coleman he was fine the Apple Cup last year. He was not why they lost, but I think the challenge continues for that group where, hey, if you think that you have a huge, size and strength advantage up front, go prove it, because this program beat you last year, and Landon Hatchett remembers that, and Drew Azzopardi remembers that. I feel like in years past, when even when Wazoo had good teams, top 25 teams that were in the Pac-12 North race until the very end, and those November Apple Cups were very fun for that reason. Washington approached it as a reminder of like, hey, who's got the size and talent edge in the trenches. And that's what you're going to rely on, right? Running the ball with Myles Gaskin, and pushing the pocket with a 3 or 4 man rush. And that was kind of how they got by in the Apple Cup and really owned the Apple Cup during the Chris Peterson and Mike Leach eras. So I think you use whatever you can use as a coaching staff. And even though you don't look across the line and see the same kind of team at Washington State as what you win against last year, that they're telling those guys, hey, remember what last year felt like? These guys punked you, these guys outplayed you. These guys cared more. Don't let that be you again this year. So I think that effort begins in a sort of a physical manner up front and with Jonah Coleman. And I think they're going to be running the ball quite a bit on Saturday.
If I'm Washington's coaches, the preparation and the messaging this week is we are a stronger, tougher football team than we were a year ago, and we are going to impose our will on both sides of the ball from the opening whistle through the closing whistle. And we're going to show how far we've come in the past year. And if we get the ball down inside the 10-yard line, I am absolutely going to call a speed option into the boundary, and you guys better stick that in the end zone. This is not about, there's not going to be any too cute or anything else. We are going to ram the ball directly down their throat. That would be my messaging.
So that's the only vengeance that can be had is the speed option recasting.
Yeah, I'm showing you that now it works because I've got my guys in place. By the way, in retrospect, I really like how Fish handled everything about that call. Like, I don't really like the call, but in retrospect, I loved how he handled it. I loved the fact that on Saturday, he said it was his fault and he made the call and stood by it. And then I liked on Monday that he came out and said, you know what? If we block that play, it scores. That's probably the most I've liked him as Washington's coach, was how he handled that whole thing.
Should we get to our Pac-12 power rankings?
Yeah, there's a bit of a shakeup. Yeah, let's get to them. Oregon, Utah remain unchanged at the top for me.
I would agree.
I have moved USC above Washington. I've had Washington 3, USC 4. They're switched to now. USC's performance wasn't great, but it was a road win in the Big Ten. They're 3-0. I feel like being true to the merits of the schedule so far, USC should be above them right now.
Yeah, and I think Purdue looks like a little more capable
Yeah, it looked
than I
decent.
was anticipating.
Mm-hmm.
So
final score was 33-17. It was a respectable performance. It was a sloppy field and all sorts of lightning delays over the weekend.
did you see the SC's got 8 p.m. Followed by 9 a.m. the next week?
I sure did. I also saw a lot of people complaining an awful lot about Michigan State having to kick off at 11 p.m. Lots of complaining about that.
I had SC ahead of Washington already, so I will keep that. I gotta say, I mean, just based on actual results against the teams they've played, I'm keeping Washington at 4, but I considered Cal.
Woo!
I considered Cal. Not ahead of Arizona State, but
I've got Washington 4, Arizona State 5, Cal 6.
that's what I'm going with too. But I think
Okay.
I think that's the tier right now. I'm not saying I think Cal would beat Washington head to head necessarily, but a home win over a Minnesota team that didn't have like crazy high expectations, but that is solidly like a 7 or 8 win Big Ten program. Look out. And they got the quarterback.
They do have the quarterback. Cal plays San Diego State, then Boston College, then Duke, then North Carolina, then Virginia Tech.
We sure they're not going to be undefeated?
I'm just saying, if you sit there, they're not going to go undefeated. If you look at their schedule right now, you don't see a loss.
Do they play Miami?
They do not.
Boy, how about a Cal Miami ACC title game?
Yeah. SMU, but I mean that's not what it looked like even when the season started.
No
Louisville,
Florida State, I assume.
no Florida State, no Clemson. Although
They're going to be
Clemson-
10-0 going to play at Stanford, and they're going to lose at Stanford.
Stanford put a dub up there. Stanford
did.
went and beat Boston College.
They did.
All
Huge
right.
ACC win. They're tied for first in the ACC right now. Good for the Cardinal.
How big a gap is there in your mind between Cal and Arizona? Both are 3-0. I'm assuming Arizona is your number 7.
Yeah, they are. Not enormous. There's very little Arizona could have done to this point to prove that like they're better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Blasted Hawaii like they should have. Good win against ASU, or excuse me, against Kansas State.
Mm-hmm.
Battle of the Wildcats. There's a world. I mean, we talk about like Cal looking promising because they have quarterback figured out.
Yeah.
What if Noah Fafita is good again?
Yeah.
He's been awesome.
He's looked really good. If Arizona beats Iowa State this week, could the Wildcats vault Cal?
They could. They definitely could. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that they will.
Just quality of victory. That means Iowa State being ranked 12th. Is Colorado next? There is a drop off right now.
Yeah.
The gap between 7 and 8 is steep in the Pac-12 power rankings.
The top 7 are all like still feeling very good about their season.
Yep.
Even Arizona State lost to Mississippi State. Like there's,
It's an SEC team. Yeah.
They can still go win the Big 12, right?
They're going down there. There were all those cowbells. It was confusing.
The bottom 5 are not.
Nope.
I see Colorado's switching back to its original starting quarterback this week. After
Probably not the best sign.
Yeah, very poor showing. against Houston, but they have to be 8th. They have to be.
Yeah.
Like the only other team in consideration is Stanford. And Stanford doesn't deserve to be ahead of Colorado, do they?
The Cougs have got 2 wins. I'm just saying, the Cougs of these bottom 5 teams, the Cougs are the only one with 2 victories.
Those 2 wins will keep them out of the basement after a 59-10 loss to North Texas. Those 2 wins will keep them out of the basement, but I cannot justify having them ahead of Colorado. We'd have to move them up to put them, like, come on. We're not doing that.
They vaulted in our power rankings despite losing by 49 points in Denton, Texas. That would destroy all legitimacy in our rankings.
We talked last week about how, like, it's not. Oh, and they're very legitimate to begin with.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We talked last week about how, like, from week to week, the number 12 team, it's not necessarily that we think this is the very worst team in the league, that they lose to all the other 11 head to head. It's that, like, you could be 4-2. But if you lose to, like, the worst team in the country by 3 touchdowns, you get to be last in the power rankings for a week. The North Texas loss for Washington State was that kind of loss, but because of what happened elsewhere, it is still not going to drop them into the basement. So I'm going Colorado 8, Stanford 9.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Then I go Wazoo 10, and that's really based only on the record. They've got 2 wins. The Beavs are winless at 0-3. And then UCLA has earned every bit of its number 12 of 12 in the Pac-12 power rankings.
I tried to sell you on UCLA 12
you were right.
Last week.
You were right.
You weren't ready, but you have no choice now. God, Oregon State is in a bad way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Granted, like, they basically outplayed Fresno State. So, and they, their quarterback has a Power 4 track record of, like, being okay. Granted, Duke decided that they didn't want him anymore, but UCLA might go 0-12. They've already fired Deshaun Foster.
We've reached the point where it's impossible on Twitter to tell real from fake news. I've seen probably 4 or 5 headlines where I've been unsure, is it a joke or is it real? Most of them involve their quarterback either taking a break or their quarterback's father being hired as the head coach of the team. But it's reached a point where the it's bad enough that you can't immediately dismiss the stuff as fake news. I don't know if there's been a football program that's fallen farther in 30 years than UCLA. Can you think of one?
Yeah, I mean, with such a dismal outlook because of, like, commitment and resources and finances, no. I mean, Nebraska had a pretty hard fall, but, like, the infrastructure was always there. And that's what made it so baffling and inexcusable, frankly.
They still care. Like, that's the one thing you would say of, like, it still really bothers people at Nebraska that they're not one of the perennial top 10 teams in the country. And there is a feeling that they should be back there, which you're right. Like, the fall that Nebraska's taken has been pretty steep, but they haven't lost everything. UCLA, I don't know what you build on if you're that program right now, because the resources, and I don't know how many people care down there.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to have to, like, here's the thing. If you can show a prospective candidate, head coaching candidate, that, like, hey, no, it's going to be different because this group of boosters here, let me introduce you to so-and-so and he'll break it down for you, has just decided, like, that they care now. And institutionally, the revenue share at UCLA, are they committing 75% to football, or is there going to be a little bit more for basketball because it's UCLA? So, like, even the money that you can max out that supposedly should level the playing field, like, even, are you even going to spend at the level that all your Big Ten peers are on football? And what are the opportunities going to be outside of that? Like the NIL under Chip Kelly was paltry. And I think one of the reasons, on top of him just like clearly not wanting to recruit, like one of the reasons he gave that job up to go be an offensive coordinator at Ohio State was because it was like, yeah, we got no ammunition here. Like, how am I supposed to recruit against USC or any school in the Big Ten, let alone USC, without being able to make huge guarantee? I think Bruce Feldman said recently that like Laiatu Latu was making like basically nothing, like very little in NIL his last year at UCLA. That's crazy. So every time I go, my selfie light battery ran out. Every time I go to Westwood, the Rose Bowl is its own other thing.
Mm-hmm.
But every time I go to Westwood, go to that campus, I'm like, how do they not get the best of the best here? Like, this place is awesome. So you've got fertile ground to recruit to, but then stadium way off campus, nobody goes, nobody seems to care. You'd have to show a new head coach like a very different level of investment, and I don't know how you prove that in an interview process.
Yeah, it is hard to be tough wearing flip-flops to school every day. However, like I will say that and the color scheme at UCLA, I do think work against having a traditional football power in the modern day and age. Like, in addition to all of the resource questions that we've just talked, I think it's hard for them to be tough. But look, when I went to UW in the 90s, and I think this was true probably the 70s through the 90s, the feeling was the two most talented teams in this conference year in and year out are USC and UCLA. They are a different breed of talent that they have in those programs. And that definitely is not true now in what you see at UCLA. And it hasn't been true for a long time. And you mentioned basketball and how much resources. They're not that good in basketball either. That not to justify at least we're awesome in basketball. Well, not really. And your coach is a whiner.
We should let the good people get going here. I will say before we wrap up, I want to throw in a quick plug, not a paid plug, just a from the heart plug for Bud Withers' new book.
Yeah, I saw that. He wrote an Apple Cup history.
He did. It's very good. It's called Too Good to Be Through. You can buy it on Amazon and maybe elsewhere, but that's the link that he's been putting out. So that's where I'll direct you to. There's some really good, like there's different chapters that explore different, like, houses divided and like friends against friends and different themes, some well-known, some not well-known of the rivalry over the years. And then also goes year by year, just sort of a retrospective of what happened in the game each season. And there's a lot of original reporting. Like, he obviously did a lot with archives and the microfilm at the UW library, and there's a lot of historical stuff in there, but he talked to a lot of people, coaches and players. He'd been working on it for a long time. So I published an excerpt from it at onmontlake.com that he was gracious enough to pass along. He talked to Jimmy Lake and Chris Peterson and Bill Moose about the Chris Peterson, Mike Leach era of Apple Cups and the trash talk that went on primarily from Jimmy Lake toward Mike Leach, and Mike Leach's sort of lacking embrace of the vibe of the rivalry and treating it like any other game, and how that didn't go over great with certain people at Washington State. And there's just all kinds of like new details in that book about games that you probably remember really well that, even as you're reading along, you go, oh, I didn't know that. Like, this is new. So this Apple Cup week, I know Bud's doing a couple appearances around the book over on the East Side this weekend. If you are looking for something to read, looking for a good gift for the Husky or Cougar fan in your life, it is a very good telling of the series history.
Bud is also a prince of a guy, just an awesome dude. My favorite Apple Cup memory involves Jim Moore. Did Bud put this story in there about how the Spider Gaines Apple Cup year, Jim Moore was, I believe he was a Cougar either freshman or sophomore, And he went to that game at Husky Stadium. It was pouring rain, and he was scheduled that night to go to his girlfriend's, one of her siblings was getting married. So he was supposed to go to the wedding afterward. And a young Jim Moore was so crestfallen at the Cougar collapse that he just went home and went to sleep. And when he spoke to his then girlfriend on the phone the next day, she wondered what happened. He assumed that she'd just seen the outcome of the Cougars game and would understand why he was unavailable to go to the wedding. And she was not very understanding of this response and dumped his ass.
I found the column, or a column. I'm sure he mentioned this more than once over the years, but I found a column from 2016, PI.com, about his favorite Apple Cup memories. And he did indeed include this one. Because I was supposed to go to my girlfriend's sister's wedding that night, but I was so bummed out that I begged it and didn't call my girlfriend to tell her I wouldn't be there. She called me the next morning to tell me I wasn't her boyfriend anymore. If the Cougars had won, would that have changed the course of my life? Would Mary Newmeyer and I gone on to get married and live happily ever after? Or should I thank Moon for throwing that pass? Mary just as easily could have been Mrs. Wrong. Nobody writes quite like Jim. Didn't he once pass out in the Moscow Pullman Airport bathroom and miss a flight or something too?
Oh, yeah. It was actually a chartered flight. And the full extent of that story was that was an Apple Cup he was not supposed to go to. He went to Boeing Field to sell his tickets to someone who was taking a flight over there. Ended up, once he got to Boeing Field, deciding that he could just go to the game and get back in time. And his wife wouldn't even realize that he had gone, except he got too hammered at the game. Didn't have a winter coat, passed out in the bathroom, woke up the next day and flew back. And when he explained everything that had happened to his wife, she expressed that, Jim, I am so tired of you and your effing Cougars.
That belongs in a column too. I'm sure it's been in there at some point. So Bud is the commissioner of the Pac-12 Fantasy League I'm in, the league that predates my arrival by many years. He's been running it for a long time. Jim also a member, so we've covered a quarter of the league here in the last 5 minutes.
There you go.
Rate the podcast if you haven't, and if you'd be so kind, leave us a review. Apple Podcasts is the best place to do it, but you can do it on Spotify as well. Thanks to those who are listening anywhere, and also to those who have been watching us on YouTube. We appreciate it. Enjoy the Apple Cup wherever you may watch it. And we'll talk to you next week.